So I'm going to talk about the Psychology BA and BSc, of course, at the University of Ottawa. So what I'll briefly cover, and thanks to our undergraduate director, Sylvain Gagnon, for putting this together. First, I'll just very briefly say who the heck I am, why you'd be listening to me during this thing. Then I'll talk about some myths about psychology, what is the science of psychology, what specifically we have at the University of Ottawa, and then making a decision. So I am, like I said, the director of the School of Psychology. I have been in this position for just under a year. I'm a professor of developmental psychology, which is why you have that lovely little baby at the bottom of the screen here, because what I specifically do research on is how babies learn language. And I'm really interested in how bilingual babies learn language. So it'll give you a bit of a flavor of some of the research that's done at the School of Psychology. I'm just one of many, as you'll see throughout this presentation. I also put up my native flag up there because I am a New Brunswicker, in case there's any other New Brunswickers or Maritimers out there in the Zoom world. But also just to highlight how I always say that because there's a reason why I'm at the University of Ottawa, because I'm from a bilingual province. I really care about bilingualism. So just always to show how your culture always affects sort of your interest and your eventual career. So some psychology myths. Myth number one, psychology is a pseudoscience. No, not at all. We are a full-on science. In the Faculty of Social Sciences that we're in, we are probably the most science-y of the social sciences in the sense that we do experimentation, just like the natural sciences. All of our techniques are experimental techniques. Myth number two, studying psychology won't get me a job easily. Nope, that's false as well. Psychology is an extremely versatile degree. It's a flexible field with a lot of skills that are in demand. A BA, BSc degree will open many doors for graduate studies, such as in psychology, clinical psychology, neuroscience. It also is a good base to start from if you want to go to law school, if you want to go to business school. This is a very good basis to have to go into those because it's dealing with humans and human behavior, and a bunch of other fields as well, academia and other fields, technical applications. Some of my students work for survey companies, for example, going into government. So lots of possibilities. Three, psychology is an easy degree. Well, I have two students here that will probably say nope to that as well, and I would say no to it and go through it as well. And the reason why is that it is a research-heavy degree. There's a lot of research design courses. There's a lot of stats. So just like in the hard sciences, these are the kind of courses that you have to take in psychology as well. So what is psychology itself? Psychologists investigate behavior. Essentially, it's the study of behavior, how you behave and how animals behave. We examine the relationships between brain function and behavior and between the environment and behavior. So the social environment, the physical environment, how does that affect how you behave? This is done with the ultimate goal of helping others directly, such as clinical work, clinical psychology, or indirectly. If we understand more about behavior in ourselves and others, it helps everyone. So the questions posed by our science are diverse, complex, and based on sound data and innovative investigative methods. So what does psychology look like at the University of Ottawa? Our School of Psychology focuses on 5 main areas. We have 5 sort of tent poles of research in our School of Psychology. Developmental psychology, you put that first because, hey, it's mine. So, hey, let's put that one first. Developmental psychology, the study of how behavior changes over the lifespan. So how do you learn? How do you change across your life? Cognitive psychology, the study of mental processes. Social and community psychology, the study of how individuals behave in social groups. Neuroscience, the study of the brain. And clinical psychology, the study of psychological problems and the promotion of well-being. Excuse me. Clinical training at the graduate level leads to the profession of clinical psychologist, which I know many people are interested in. So we, of course, talk about that in more detail later. I just would highlight that we are the only institution in the national capital that does offer this training. We do have other minor areas in our department as well. So geropsychology, the study of behavior in elderly individuals, mental health in racialized communities, modeling of cognition, AI. So we do have other areas as well. We have, at the undergraduate level, an honors BSc in psychology, so an honors Bachelor of Science, an honors Bachelor of Arts, and I will talk about more in detail in the question and answer about what those two things are, how they differ, and what is important to both. A major in psychology and a minor in psychology, so we have 4 options. What are the resources, the physical resources and the training resources that we have at the University of Ottawa? Well, we have a pretty remarkable set of both of those things. We have a whole team ready to offer high quality training in psychology. We have 53 full-time professors, and that is a large number. Across the country, we are one of the largest departments of psychology in Canada. With 53 full-time professors, trust me, that's a really big department. And those professors are experts in diverse areas of psychology, as I pointed out in that previous slide. So really, there is something for everyone. I'm sure if you come to the University of Ottawa, you will have a professor that is an expert in something you are interested in. I also want to highlight that our professors are from diverse communities, from the queer community, from the Black community, first generation Canadians, first generation of their families to go to school, which I think is also an important thing. And that reflects our desire to reflect twice there, our desire to reflect our student population. We have many part-time professors who share their professional expertise via their teaching as well. So aside from our 53 full-time professors, there's a host of part-time professors that come in from the community because they're experts in that specific thing and teach a course in that area. We have extremely caring and experienced support staff to help you. And we have graduate students whose roles as mentors are essential, both in the lab as a research leader, so if you're doing research in a lab, but also in the classroom as teaching assistants. Just to give you a quick highlights of some of our areas, we have professors doing, like I said, a diverse amount of research. We have people like Dr. Nafisa Ismail in neuroscience, who's looking at hormonal effects of stress, that kind of research. In the cognitive area, we have people focusing on learning, memory, AI, people like Dr. Erin Maloney, who looks at how kids learn math and their anxieties surrounding math. In the developmental area, we have people looking at all ages. We have people like Dr. Christina Tantz, who has headed up a really cool physical resource for the School of Psychology, which is the Living Lab at the Canada Museum of Science and Tech. And what this is a lab within the museum itself where kids participate in developmental psychology research as they come through the museum. So as they're at the museum, they participate in studies. And guess who's running those studies? A lot of undergraduate students. We have the social community area, with people like Dr. Tim O'Brien, who's looking at the social determinants of homelessness and how to help with the homelessness problem in Canada. And in the clinical area, we have a lot of people in the clinical area. It is our largest sub-area in our department, looking at a host of different things. But we have people like Dr. Jude-Marie Sénat, who's looking at trauma, stress, and resilience in racialized communities, for example. So just to give you a flavor of some of the different things that we do. We also have a really cool resource at the University of Ottawa called the Inspire Lab. And this is a lab that it's one of the very few in North America, this type of lab, and it's a shared lab. So everyone can use it in the department, including students. And it has within it a host of different what we call psychophysical measures. So EEG, otherwise known as brain waves, EKG, your heart rate, galvanic skin response, eye tracking where you look at on a screen. So we can use these cutting edge technologies to look at behavior, and it's open to everyone in the school. And it's led by actually one of our former graduates, Dr. Simon Baudry. And it also facilitates recruitment of participants in our research, both at the university level and in the community, bringing people from the community onto campus in non-COVID times. And the other thing about this Inspire Lab is that they host what we call the ISPR, which I always forget the exact acronym, but essentially what it is the participant pool for first-year students. So in your first year as a psych student, you can participate in research and get course credit for it. So you can come into the Inspire Lab, participate in a study, and you walk away with course credit. So that's a really cool thing. So, sort of to reiterate all those things, at the School of Psychology, you have unique opportunities. I didn't even mention the big one, in my point of view, of course, is that we are bilingual, so you have the opportunity to do anything in English or French. We have clinical psychology that is not at every university in Canada, but we have a very large clinical area at the University of Ottawa. We have heavy student involvement in research because we believe that you shouldn't be involved in research because it gives you career skills. It gives you applicable career skills to take forward after getting your degree. And we have world-class professors and researchers. We have exceptional resources like the Inspire Lab, like our neuroscience labs, like the Living Lab at the museum. We have community experience, so you can go out into the community and do research there. And we have support and mentoring. That support and mentoring are your professors, your TAs, your lab leaders, but also, of course, in the greater university, there's lots of other mentoring as well. And then you bring your own objectives. So what are you thinking about for a career? What kind of research areas and training are you most interested in? And what are the possibilities of other majors and minors? I'm talking about psychology, but of course you can combine your psychology degree with other things. So maybe you're interested in law and justice, so you're going to do a criminology degree and a psychology degree. You have those possibilities. So, and some opportunities in your degree program. And then I'm going to sort of rush through the next part, but this I want to focus on a little bit, is that you can do an honors thesis as your degree. The honors thesis and our lab courses provide you once again with these very applied career opportunities. So if you do an honors thesis, you are supervised by a professor, a researcher. You learn to design and carry out a research project. This is all in your fourth year. You present your project and disseminate your results at a conference. You write out the thesis on your activities. All of this prepares you for further graduate studies or a research-based career, or even a career, for example, in human resources, because you have to write reports, you have to interpret things. So all of these advantages and benefits are essentially geared towards your career skills. We also have something called the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program. This is in your third or second year, I believe, second or third year. And what it is essentially a scholarship to come and be an intern in a lab. So for example, I'm hosting 2 UOttawa students right now. So 2 students are in this program in my lab, and they're working on a project. They're going to have to create a poster at the end of their project, but even better, they get a scholarship of $1,000 to work on this project. So it's a really great program in your second or third year to get you, once again, into the research side of psychology. It gives you an enriched university experience, quick integration into research, one-on-one relationship with a professor, practical experience in a field of interest, prep for grad work, increased commitment to your studies, assist in your career decision-making, and even more importantly, official recognition. You will see this on your transcript. I forgot the word for transcript there for a sec. I'm going to skip the international mobility because that's greater, it's beyond the School of Psychology and it's more in social sciences, so we can talk about that later. In terms of versatility, what a university degree in psychology will give you is the opportunity to further studies in psychology beyond the BA. And we'll talk about that in the QA, I'm sure, as well, because in order to become, for example, a clinical psychologist, you can't stop at a BA. You must go and get a PhD. So a lot of people are on that track. Going on to do some masters in counseling, going on to do a master's or PhD in experimental psychology or neuroscience, going on to do social work, education, law, medicine, all of these are possibilities after getting your BA, BSc in psychology. You can stop with the bachelor's and go into work with government, research, career counseling, human resource management, probation officer. There's so many things because essentially you're getting a degree that you are specializing in human behavior. So anything that matters for human behavior, that's what a degree in psychology will help. And I'm actually going to skip the next part and just say the take-home messages. Hopefully, I've shown in this very quick presentation that the School of Psychology is an extremely dynamic place that offers multiple opportunities. Hopefully, I've shown that our degrees will hopefully open doors for you. And what awaits you is very exciting. But I wanted to just rush to the end there because I think what's more important is actually answering questions rather than me continuing to talk. So
I have one question here that I think might interest a lot of people. So we have a question about whether the School of Psychology have sections or program that will lead in career doing therapy with PTSD. But I think many people might have versions of this. What will it really lead me to? So I don't know if you want to answer this, otherwise I can too.
Sure, I just can't seem to stop sharing my screen for some reason, so I apologize for that. There's no stop share at the bottom of my screen right now. So hey, there we go. Thanks. So in terms of counseling, was the question?
Yes. Can you do a career doing therapy for PTSD with an undergrad in psychology?
No. I would say no to that question. The only reason why I'm going to say no to that question, you could, but I'm going to clarify my answer. Typically, what would happen is you go and do a master's in counseling after getting your bachelor's degree. So those masters in counseling could be 1 or 2 years. That's the optimal route for a counseling degree. I should highlight that counseling is different from clinical psychology though. So clinical psychology, becoming a clinical psychologist is regulated. It's a regulated profession, just like medical doctors. So you need to go get a PhD to become a clinical psychologist. A counselor, there are some regulations, but fewer. And so typically it's a much, there's less requirements because it's not as regulated. So then if you're going to be a counselor or a therapist, you can get that with a master's degree. Why I'm saying no with the BA is because I don't think it's as responsible, right? I think it's important to go get that extra bit of master's to get the counseling part, if you're interested in becoming a counselor, which, like I said, is different than becoming a clinical psychologist. Those are two different things because a clinical psychologist is a regulated profession. You need to get the PhD. You need to be approved by the College of Psychologists in order to call yourself a clinical psychologist. I always say this when I do the high school, back in the pre-COVID days when I went to talk to high school students, that anyone can call themselves a therapist, but if you call yourself a clinical psychologist, people are going to come sue you because you need to be regulated, just like you can't call yourself a medical doctor. So.
Okay, awesome. I have another one here that might be really relevant for everyone. What is the difference between a BA and a BSc in psychology?
Yes, I was hoping someone would ask that because I wanted to talk about it. So the BA and Bachelor of Arts versus Bachelor of Science. So once again, what I usually tell students coming into university is I focus on the Bachelor of Science because if the Bachelor of Science isn't what you need, everything else is the BA, okay? So the Bachelor of Science is a science degree. You're going to have to take biology. You're going to have to take chemistry. You're going to have to take all of those things during your undergraduate degree. And those are important if you want to become a neuroscientist or a psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who specializes in psychology. So if you want to become a medical doctor or a neuroscientist, or somebody, for example, who's going to go work for a pharmacology company doing psychopharmacology work, like Pfizer, you will have to take the BSc. You need to take the BSc to do those jobs. For any other job related to psychology, it's the BA, right? If you want to become a clinical psychologist, you can do a BSc if you want, but you'll get in with the BA as well. you want to become a human resources manager, BA is fine. If you want to go to law school, BA is fine. If you want to go to business school, BA is fine. So really the BSc is a very special degree if you're thinking about going into neuroscience medical work. Does that make sense?
We have other questions that are a little bit more specific. So can you choose a concentration within psychology, for example, cognitive psychology, and another one that you might answer at the same time? So somebody who is interested in forensic psychology, are there courses? Is there something that they can do to go towards that specific path?
Yeah. So on your transcript at the end, you won't have like a specialization in developmental psychology. That doesn't appear on your transcript in the end, but you can still do it. And most people do. What they do is they find that they're really interested in one sub area. So they're very interested in developmental psychology. Because that's what I do, I'll just stick with it. So what they'll do is they'll take language development, cognitive development, social development, research, what's it called? Research design developmental psychology. I think that's the name of the course. So they'll do a bunch of courses only in developmental psychology. Now, yes, you won't have something on your degree at the end that says specialized in developmental psychology, but anyone who looks at your transcript, it shows that you specialized in developmental psychology. But more importantly, is that if you do the research parts as well, let's say you also volunteer in one of the labs, you do your UOttawa program and you're an research intern in one of the developmental labs, then more importantly, what you're going to have are the connections to developmental professors who are going to be writing your reference letters. And that's really what you want in the end, right? So in that sense, yes. In an official sense, you won't have something on your degree, but in a practical sense, yes. Now for forensic psychology, we do have a couple of forensic courses at the undergraduate level. We have one professor that does focus on forensic psychology, but it isn't one of our core areas. So yes, there are opportunities in play, but it's not one of our core areas. However, we are in the same faculty, the Faculty of Social Sciences, as criminology. And so there is the opportunity to combine those two degrees, right? Do a major minor in psychology and criminology, which is getting it's getting to that point of forensic psychology. But I will be fully honest, some of the universities have forensic psychology as a core area. So for example, uOttawa, or whatever they're calling themselves now, in the Durham region of Southern Ontario, that university has forensic psychology as a separate area, for example. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, I have two more forensic psych questions. The first is, if somebody wanted to become a forensic psychologist, would they have to get a master's or a PhD?
That's a good question. It really depends on what you want to do on some level. So a PhD, what that would give you is the true sort of what I think most people would think of as a forensic psychologist, either in the clinical or experimental sense. Like a clinical forensic psychologist is a clinical psychologist that would be working in the prison system, for example, right? Or working with rehabilitation or reintegration into society, those kind of issues. On the clinical side, experimental forensic psychologist would be somebody doing research on these things. That would be a PhD, right? In that traditional sense. But I'm sure with the master's, like there's still opportunities in play. So working within the prison system, maybe as or working as a probation officer, for example, with a master's of forensic psychology, getting more detail into the forensic system, for example. So it really depends on your career goals, I think.
Yeah, I think there is a possibility of working with a forensic population in counseling and social work and psychology in many different fields. Usually when it comes to being a clinician, a psychologist, you would need to do a PhD in clinical psychology, and then you can focus that training towards a forensic population and specialize yourself. So hopefully that answers that question. And I have another one here. For a joint criminology psychology degree, do I go for a BA or a BSc?
It has to be a BA because there's no BSc in criminology. The interesting thing about psychology is that we're a social science and we're a science. We straddle both worlds right? In that we do experimentation, we do those kind of things. We're very research heavy. That's not to say research doesn't happen in criminology. It obviously does, but it's not as experimental based as psychology is. So there is no BSc in any other field in social sciences except psychology. We're the only BSc in the social sciences. So it has to be a BA for that.
Okay, and I have another one here. What is the difference in career opportunities between a sociology and a psychology degree?
That might be a bit tougher for me because I'm not as familiar with sociology. But I can tell you generally what the difference is between those two things. So a sociologist, the best way to think about it, a psychologist studies individuals. Now we could study individuals in groups, right? Like I pointed out earlier, social psychology. How does an individual react to social groups, for example? And we obviously study groups of individuals, but usually it's because we want to get enough statistical power to see if there's a difference between two types of people. So we have to gather enough data from a bunch of people. But fundamentally, psychology looks at individuals. Sociology looks at societies. So it's really the scope, right? So psychology is focused on behavior and individuals. Sociology is focused on behavior of entire societies, entire cultures. And so that's the big difference between the two. So I'm actually not sure what career opportunities are in sociology. I apologize, but it's not my field. But I think it'd be my best friend actually took a master's of sociology. So I do know what she does. So I can give that example. So for example, she works for the federal government doing policy. She does health policy for the federal government because she's looking at policy at the provincial level. So she's looking at how do provinces deal with health issues. So that's an example from sociology.
Next question, we have one here. So if you want to do like 2 degrees, right? So here we have a question about, would we have to apply for both the psychology and criminology, but I'm sure it could be psychology and something else, right? How do we go about doing a little bit of both with the major and the minor and all of that?
Yeah, so that would be something, there's this wonderful thing at the University of Ottawa, at the Faculty of Social Sciences, the undergraduate office. And so the undergraduate office at the faculty deals with most of these things in the sense that you come to one of their advisors, and they're all online right now, obviously. You come to one of their advisors and you say, I would like to do this and this. And they're going to help you design what you need. So it might be that you are only a little bit interested in it, so you take 1 or 2 courses and that's it. Or you might want to go to the level of doing a minor in that area. And so they're going to facilitate that process for you. And it's not something you have to necessarily do day one either, right? You can, your second year, you'll have time to maybe at the beginning of your second year go, you know what, I actually do want to do that over there. You won't be able to really do that in your 4th year. You're too far in at that point, right? But in your first, second year, you have that wiggle room, that room to move that you could, for example, add a minor at that point. So that's something you would talk to with your undergraduate advisor, how to structure it.
Okay, and I have one question. Okay. So are there any options to gain experience before admitting to a program? So something like an internship, volunteer. There's somebody that mentioned a co-op earlier. I can speak a little bit to that too. There's always the possibility of volunteering before doing an undergrad in psychology if you're interested in getting a better idea of what you like, what you dislike, what you're good at, what you're not so good at, right? So I always encourage volunteering, but is it integrated as part of a program? Not so much. I know on the university level we have Le Centre Michael Jean, which is like an organization that's within the university that connects students to volunteering. But in terms of volunteering as part of the program, not so much. We do encourage volunteering in research, but I think it might be a little bit different from what you were referring to here. Is there anything you want to add to that, Dr. Fennell?
Yeah, so at the university level, there is like I talked about, the uOttawa program gives you that research volunteering part of things. The Michael Jean Center you do get credits. Like, so for example, I've had 2 undergraduate students work in my lab and get credit for volunteering because it's still a volunteer opportunity, for example. There's also what we call the Ventures program. I'm going to answer this a bit weirdly, I know, but it's where we integrate community interactions into certain courses. Okay, so this is why I'm bringing it up here as a volunteering thing. So these courses, and we have at least 3 in psychology right now, what they do is they design the course to answer a question, a research question, from a community partner who is usually like an NGO or some other community activist organization, anything like that. So they come and they say, hey, I have this question that will help us do our job to help with homelessness or help with something else. And then your course, I think it's 30% of your mark in that course is you helping to answer that question from the community group. So we also have that kind of interaction between outside organizations and your training in the School of Psychology. So very quickly, my language development course last year was a Ventures course. I was part of the program. And we worked with a school that was a school that does Arabic language early on, or Arabic immersion. And so they came to us and said, well, it's a language development course. We would love, is there any great ways that we could teach kids Arabic very early on in our school system? And so that was the course project. And teams of students came up with things like designing websites and designing games, all based on science, and then giving it back to a community partner. So those are the kind of things that we have.
And if somebody was interested in volunteering in research specifically, how could they go about doing that?
So the best way is to just email the lab. So if you want to get involved in research outside of your courses, right? I've shown that there's a lot of research that you can do just via your courses themselves. But if you want to get extra research opportunities, this is especially those of you that want to go on to do graduate work. This is very important. So if you want to go on to do a counseling degree, a clinical psychology PhD, an experimental psychology PhD, a medical degree, getting these outside class research opportunities are very important. And what you do is you simply just email the lab director and say, hi, I'm interested. What's very important is to be professional about it, of course. So typically what you would do is you'd say, I'm interested for these reasons. We don't need like a 3-page letter, just, a paragraph. Why are you interested in coming to work in a bilingual baby lab? And also always attach your CV. And I know that you go, well, my CV only shows that, I worked at Old Navy and I babysat. You know what? For me, that's important because, I work, my lab works with kids. The fact that you babysat kids, that's important to me. The fact that you work in customer service is important to me because I have parents coming to the lab and I need people to be professional and courteous to the parents coming into the lab. So don't underestimate your CV ever, and always attach it when you're interested in approaching a professor to work in their lab. Give us a very brief why you want to come work in the lab and attach your CV.
All right, we'll move to the next one. So if you do an honors degree, are you able to do within that degree a major and a minor? How does that work?
Well, the honors is your major, essentially. So the honors is automatically your major, essentially. That's how that works. Can you do a minor with an honors? That's a really good question. I'm actually not sure. That's sort of that's where I say the undergraduate advisors are important because they answer these sort of more technical questions. Because I'm not sure if you have enough wiggle room to do a minor, but you might. Because the honors is a bit more intensive, right? So with an honors degree, you're doing a little bit more courses in the specific area than a major. So you have a couple more requirements that you have to do in terms of coursework in the psychology. And you also have to do that honors thesis in your 4th year, which is 6 credits. So essentially it's 2 full courses is your honors thesis. So you get 6 credits for doing that honors thesis. So you have a little bit less room to work around. So that's why I'm not sure if you can do the minor with the honors. You definitely can do it with a major. I'm not sure with the honors. You might have to like take an extra year or something. I'm not sure. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question directly.
If somebody is not interested in doing research, what field could they go into or could they consider?
So the research side of stuff, I still think is important at the training level. So even if you're not going to go on to do research, which, let's be honest, most of us are not going to do that. Like straight up, most people are not going to go on to a research career. But it's important at the undergraduate level to have exposure to it, to understand it, to do it, because it gives you so many practical skills that are important for your career no matter what you do. So the fact that you can write a research report means that you can synthesize and present data to people. You have what we call knowledge mobilization skills or communication skills. So it's pretty important to have it at the undergraduate level. What you could do after that is not research-based, a bunch of stuff, right? So once you come out of the bachelor's degree, like I've highlighted earlier, you could do, like, go on to do a business degree. You can go on to do human resource work. You can go on to be a counselor. Like you're not going to do really a lot of research becoming a counselor, right? So those kind of things are career opportunities that are not research-based, but still flow out of the bachelor's degree.
Yeah, and I think if I can add to that, many people who are in the PhD in clinical psychology, for example, although research is a core part of the degree, many of them don't end up doing a research career and are psychologists and clinicians. So sometimes it's about, yeah, like you said, it's part of the training, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what you're going to do in the end.
Just a quick addendum there. I agree. Like, if you become a clinical psychologist who is not affiliated with the university, which most clinical psychologists are not, you're just going to do your job as a clinical psychologist. But you need to be a research consumer still, right? And so that's still what the degree gives you. Like, even if you're not doing research, you have to be up to date on what the latest research is. Because in order to give good therapy to your patients, you need to know, oh, that therapeutic technique that I was doing 2 years ago, well, we find out now that doesn't work for this disorder. So I always say, even if you're not going to be doing the research, it's a good skill to be a research consumer because it keeps you up to date.
Yeah, and we have one here. What is the difference between doing a major and a minor and a BSc and a BA?
So I've already highlighted the difference between the BSc, BA. So the BSc is very specific. You're going to go into more of the medical types of professions. So being a doctor or a psychiatrist, which is a doctor, being a neuroscientist, being somebody who works for a psychopharmacological company, those kind of things. BA is everything else. For the major minor, it's just basically how many courses did you take in the area. So there's a minimum number of courses for a minor, there's a minimum number of courses for a major, which is obviously higher because it's a major. So essentially the difference between a major and minor is how many courses did you take in that area, is the most basic definition of it.
Okay, another question here. For careers, would you say that going into a research or clinical psychology would be better in terms of opportunities, salary, etc.?
That's a tough one. So clinical psychology is good money, yes. But there's so many different, this is where with psychology, there's so many different possible careers coming out of these degrees that it's tough to say one's necessarily better than the other. It really is what you want to do. Because you could have somebody that comes out of BA in psychology, a bit more researchy, and then goes and does psychological research for a major company and makes scads of money doing psychological research for that major company, because that company will need to know what do their consumers want. So they need to be able to essentially do, construct surveys, construct focus groups to figure out what do these consumers want. Guess who does that? A psychologist. A psychologist does that. So if you're a psychologist working for a Fortune 500 company, I'm sure you're making a really good amount of money. The clinical psychologist makes a good amount of money as well. So really it's, it's what are you going to do with the degree more so than is there one overall better than the other? It really is what you want to do, because you don't want to be stuck in a career that is not interesting to you.
Do you have to contact a professor you'd like to work with before enrolling in the honors thesis course?
So we have the honors thesis course set up so it's in your 4th year, obviously. So in your 3rd year is when you contact professors, and there's a list of professors who are taking honor students. So you'll be provided with a list of professors that are taking honor students and how many students they are taking. So this year, for example, I only took one because I'm currently the director and I have a bunch of other responsibilities right now. So I didn't want to shortchange any students. I knew if I took 3 students, they wouldn't get my full attention, and that's not fair to them. So I only took one, but another colleague of mine took 4, right? And that was on the list that, that person will take 4 students, up to 4 students. I will take 1 student. So you're going to see not only who is available, but how many spots are available. And you would contact them in your 3rd year.
In your opinion, what are students, oops, that question just disappeared. All right, next. I'm a returning student with an interest in pursuing graduate studies. What is the biggest distinction between the clinical and experimental psychology program? Is one more engaged with the mental health community than the other?
Well, either one could be, overall clinical is obviously more engaged with mental health, but that's not to say that on the experimental side that doesn't occur. So the big difference is that the clinical program is a professional program. It is giving you the training to become a clinical psychologist. You must have a PhD in clinical psychology in order to become a clinical psychologist, to be eventually approved by the College of Psychologists. The experimental program is a research-based PhD. Once again, research is also on the clinical side. It's just that it's not that, we call it a professional program, the clinical one, because it's affiliated with a college of psychologists, right? On the experimental side, there is no college of psychologists for experimental psychologists. We still get to call ourselves psychologists. We don't get to call ourselves clinical psychologists. And so what we do with our degree is, like, I have an experimental psychology PhD. I went and became a professor, but that's not what everyone does. A colleague of mine who graduated with me is actually a major policy person at the OECD in Paris, right? So you can go on to do a bunch of different things with the experimental side as well. But the big difference between the two is one is a professional program, one isn't. Now getting back to the question of mental health. The clinical side looks at mental health because it's central to clinical psychology. The experimental side can also look at mental health, but we're the ones doing the research. Clinical psychologists also do research, but we could do research on it as well. So for example, I mentioned earlier Dr. Erin Maloney, who's doing how kids learn math, but more specifically, if they're anxious about math. So guess what? She works a bit with clinical psychologists because she's looking at anxiety, which is a mental health issue, right? So it does occur across both sides. I just wanted to say that it's not exclusive only to one side.
So we have a question here about what are the actual statistics with regards to what students are taking honors versus PhD? So I guess how many people are being enrolled in the honors program and how many people end up doing a PhD, I think is what is meant here.
Actually, I don't know that exact statistic. I can tell you some overall things. So out of all of our students, and we have a lot of students in psychology, we have the largest department on campus. Only 100, I want to say 120, about 120 take honors in the end. It is a very specialized degree because it really is, if you want to go on to med school, grad school, most people don't want to go on to med school or grad school. Most people want to go on to a job directly from a BA, right? So it's a smaller group to begin with. So let's say there's about 120. At our university, we accept about, it varies from year to year, but about 32 incoming graduate students. So that's how many grad students come into our program every year, is about 32. split across both. So there's about 15 clinical and about 15 experimental, with a couple maybe extra on either side.
Okay, and I have a question here. How large are the first year classes on average?
Geez, I should know that off the top of my head. I'm not sure. Do either one of you know about how many? Have either one of you TA'd intro psych recently?
It depends on which courses. So the intro to psychology courses tend to be much bigger. Victoria, do you have an answer?
Yes, the undergraduate introductory courses are quite large, can be up to 200 to 300 students. But we also have other courses as you progress from the first year introductory courses and head into classes like research methods and ethics, where your class sizes are much smaller, between like 20 to 50. So really after first year, class sizes do reduce, but there are a couple hundred possibly in your classes. Although if we continue to do some online formats, that might look a little differently as well.
I actually should say one thing about that was a really good point, saying that yes, they rapidly reduce. So like in your fourth year, you're looking at like some classes with 5 students in them, right? So as you get more senior in the program, there's fewer and fewer students. So my third year language development class never exceeds 100 ever, right? But the other thing about the University of Ottawa is that we actually have smaller class sizes. For one major reason, which you might not have thought of, we're a bilingual university. We must offer all core courses in both English and French. So we have twins of every class, right? So if we have this class in English, it must also be offered in French, and vice versa. That actually reduces our class sizes because it gets split, right? So we sort of have more classes to offer. And sometimes English students take the French course, for example, if they're doing a French immersion undergrad degree, so they can take the French course. Some Francophones take the English course. So it sort of brings our numbers down a little bit.
And on average, what would be the student-professor ratio in the department?
At the undergraduate level, this is where Sylvain, the director of undergraduate, is much better than me. I know exactly how many graduate students we have. How many undergrads do we have, though? I should know. Unfortunately, I do not know off the top of my head how many current undergrads we have. The one thing I could say is that the fact that we have 53 full-time professors is especially large for a psychology department. So if you look at other psych departments, the only other ones that you're going to see that size are like U of T, probably has about that many. Of course, spread over multiple campuses, though, we only have one. And so, you have half them in Mississauga and half them in Scarborough. But in Ottawa, we're all in the same place. It's like U of T might be that size, but that's about it. So we're an especially large department in terms of professors. So that's got to mean that we have a good student to professor ratio overall, because our overall number of undergraduate students at the university is about the same size as a UBC or, a comparable, it's about 40,000 students. So the fact that we have so many professors, it must mean that we have a pretty decent student to professor ratio.
We are running low on our questions, so we'd invite everybody to go ahead and, one just popped in. How competitive is it to get into the clinical psychology program as opposed to the experimental psychology program?
Great question. It's something I often talk about when I do high school sort of presentations as well. If you're interested in doing clinical psychology, you have to pretty much start preparing second year university. Like if you're going to go into clinical psychology, you've got to start thinking about it early on in the program. The reason why is because it is very competitive. I'm a very honest person and I don't sugarcoat much. So clinical psychology, extremely competitive. It's more competitive than med school. So in order to get into clinical psychology, there's a limited number of spaces. So like I said, at our university, there's 15 spaces per year. That's it. We can't take any more because they're limited by the College of Psychologists for a good reason, because you want good training. And I would say in order to get in, you pretty much need above a 9.0 out of 10. That's pretty standard. So you need a 90% average or higher, and you need an honors degree, And you also need to have experience in some clinical aspects like volunteering outside and research and all these things to make a very nice package. Experimental psychology, also competitive, but not as competitive. So for experimental psychology, more looking at an 80 and above, 85. So if you don't, well, we won't accept you if you don't have an 80% average. That's in the experimental cycle. But you can usually get in with just a bit above that. So there's about a 10% admissions in terms of GPA difference. And you would not need, for example, the clinical side as much. Whereas somebody applying to clinical PhD needs both clinical sort of experience and research experience. Somebody applying to an experimental degree would only need the research experience. So overall, definitely more competitive getting into clinical psychology.
Okay, and I have a question here, but before I read it, just a last warning that we have only a few more minutes and then we'll have to close the session for today. So feel free to throw in your questions to make the best of those few last minutes. Okay, so in the wake of COVID, how are classes being run? How much is online versus in the classroom?
There's nothing in the classroom right now. Nowhere at the university, basically. And that's for health reasons, for obvious health reasons. So right now it's pretty much all online. How is it being taught online is very different depending on what course you're in. So some courses are live, some courses are recorded with discussion groups. So it really is up to the professor to decide how is the course going to be transmitted to the students. A lot of our professors are doing a hybrid model of some pre-recorded and then some live discussions with students over Zoom to try to get the best of both worlds happening. Yeah, so right now it's pretty much all online until we're out of the pandemic.